Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
In a dimly lit room deep within the walls of the Vatican, beneath layers of marble and centuries of tradition, rest tomes and scrolls the public will never see. Among them, if rumors whispered by scholars and dismissed by clergymen are true, is a full copy of the ancient Ethiopian Bible. Unlike the 66-book Protestant canon or the 73-book Roman Catholic Bible, this Ethiopian version contains 81 books, some so ancient and enigmatic that Western religious institutions have chosen to sideline, dismiss, or outright suppress them. But why? Why would the very seat of global Christendom choose to keep such a version in the shadows, rather than embrace it? The answer, it seems, lies not only in theological disagreements, but in colonial power struggles, racialized hierarchies, and an enduring fear of what these African scriptures truly reveal. To understand why the Vatican ever sought to distance itself from the Ethiopian Bible, one must first step back into a time when Christianity was not Roman, not European, but African in its earliest flame. Long before Rome declared itself the spiritual capital of Christendom, Ethiopia, specifically the Kingdom of Aksum, was already practicing a deeply rooted form of Christianity. In fact, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church officially accepted Christianity as a state religion in the early 4th century, around the time of Emperor Constantine's famous conversion in Rome. But while Europe was just beginning to formalize Christian doctrine, Ethiopian scribes had already begun compiling, translating, and safeguarding ancient scriptures, some of which predated or diverged from those the Church of Rome would later codify as canonical. The Ethiopian Bible is not simply a longer Bible. It is a profoundly different one in tone, scope, and theological vision. It includes books such as Enoch, Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, 1 Maccabean, and 2 Maccabean, distinct from the Maccabees found in Catholic and Orthodox canons. These texts contain stories of angels, cosmic battles, prophecies, the fall of the Watchers, and visions of the afterlife that paint a radically different spiritual universe than what most Western Christians are familiar with. And it is precisely here where the tension begins to boil. When European powers began to expand into Africa during the age of exploration and colonization, religious missions were at the forefront of their cultural invasion. They brought with them not only guns and commerce, but also a version of Christianity that had been sanitized and reshaped by Rome. The Ethiopian Bible, with its ancient Semitic roots, Afrocentric characters, and unapologetically mystical tone, posed a threat. It suggested that Africa wasn't merely a place to be civilized by Christian missionaries, but a sacred land that had preserved authentic Christian teachings long before the Vatican ever existed. It also presented something else, something more dangerous than theological variants. It shattered the whitewashed image of biblical figures. In the Ethiopian texts, patriarchs, prophets, and angels were not painted in European terms. They were described in ways far more aligned with African features and traditions. The Queen of Sheba, for instance, was not a mythical foreigner, but a foundational figure in Ethiopian royal lineage. And Menelik, said to be the son of Solomon and Sheba, is honored as the first emperor of Ethiopia. The Ark of the Covenant, according to Ethiopian tradition, was brought to Aksum by Menelik himself, and is believed by many Ethiopians to still reside there to this day. None of this fit into the Roman Catholic Church's version of Christian history, which favored a European-centered narrative and hierarchy. It was during the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and later during the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, that the formal canons of the Bible were established in the Western world. During these councils, books were voted on, selected, or rejected based on doctrinal conformity and political convenience. Many of the texts kept sacred in Ethiopia were labeled apocryphal, Gnostic, or heretical. The Book of Enoch, for example, widely revered in the Ethiopian canon, was condemned and excluded in the West, in part because of its radical imagery and its deep references to the rebellion of angels and end-time prophecies. Interestingly, fragments of Enoch were later found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, validating its antiquity and suggesting it had once been widely accepted among early Jewish and Christian communities. Yet despite these discoveries, the Roman Church never reincorporated these banned texts. Why? Because to do so would be to open a Pandora's box. The Vatican's power rested on its claim to authoritative interpretation of scripture and tradition. Accepting the Ethiopian canon would imply that the Church had omitted or suppressed key elements of divine revelation. It would call into question the legitimacy of centuries of theological development and papal authority. More importantly, it would challenge Eurocentric depictions of Christianity, depictions that had been used to justify colonization, slavery, and spiritual domination over non-European peoples. Throughout the medieval and early modern eras, the Ethiopian Church remained stubbornly independent. When Jesuit missionaries attempted to bring it under papal authority in the 16th and 17th centuries, they were met with fierce resistance. Emperor Sisennios briefly converted to Catholicism under Jesuit influence in the early 1600s, but his decision sparked a massive civil revolt. The Ethiopian people, led by Orthodox clergy, rejected Rome's interference and expelled the Jesuits from the country in 1632. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church formally severed all ties with the Vatican and reaffirmed its own canon and liturgical traditions. From then on, the Vatican treated the Ethiopian Church and its Bible as exotic, peripheral, and heretical. Rare manuscripts from Ethiopia were collected by European explorers and stored in libraries and museums, but not celebrated or disseminated. In fact, the Vatican Library contains numerous Guizi manuscripts, the ancient Ethiopian scriptural language, but few have ever been translated into modern languages or published for broad consumption. The modern consequence of this long history is the invisibility of the Ethiopian Bible in global Christianity. Few outside of scholarly or Ethiopian Orthodox circles even know of its existence, and fewer still realize its implications. But now, as the global South rises and as African spiritual histories gain renewed attention, the suppressed truths of the Ethiopian canon are once again rising to the surface. Far from being a simple religious divergence, the banning, or rather the marginalization, of the Ethiopian Bible by the Vatican was an act of political control. It was a strategic maneuver to consolidate spiritual authority, to erase African contributions to biblical history, and to construct a Eurocentric Christian identity that could justify the domination of other peoples. But texts do not stay buried forever. The Ethiopian Bible is still alive, read, sung, chanted, and memorized in monasteries across the highlands of Ethiopia. Its truths, veiled for centuries, are now returning like echoes from the ancient hills, challenging the world to rethink everything it thought it knew about Scripture. In the end, the question isn't merely why the Vatican banned the Ethiopian Bible. The deeper question is this: what did the Ethiopian Bible reveal that made powerful men so determined to silence it?